I'm actually going to ask you, please, to think about a number between 0 and 21. And if you have a piece of paper or something to hand, to jot it down. And the reason for these numbers will become clear later. So a number between 0 and 21. So as Dal said, I'm really interested in deer in poetry, and over the past few years for my PhD, I've been collecting a deer poetry archive. It's very incomplete, it's in progress. I'm always finding new poems, being sent new poems, but that was actually the source material for the first piece that I'm going to present this evening, which is called A Summoning Spell for Lost Deer. So the first part of the poem, just to set the context, is, if you like, an elegy. So it is looking at deer being lost, ways in which they're killed. And the second half is more of a kind of an invocation, a kind of drawing of deer into being. And I made this poem, it's a collage poem. So I've taken lines and phrases from some of the works in my deer poetry archive and formed them together into this poem. So if you like, so I'm indebted to all the poets who have created those initial phrases. I actually, you'll see in the film that the names of these poets come up on the screen. Before I show it, I just wanted to explain that the piece was initially made last year for Astra Papachristodoulou for her exhibition at the Art Park Gallery in Rhodes. And it was actually, I typed it onto linen ribbons. And these are following in the tradition of Gaelic clúti ribbons. So I tied these ribbons into a tree, and in Rhodes they were tied into a tree as well. So this adds to the idea of them being a kind of a wish, because the tradition of clúti ribbons is that they're a kind of a wish for healing. So in the past, people would have tied fragments of a sick person's clothes into bushes or a tree around a clúti well with a wish for them to get better. So I'm going to actually share my screen now if I can, so that I can begin the film.
A Summoning Spell for Lost Deer. A song to call the deer, the dappled deer dreaming, and through glass a deer with a mingling light. The deer from the wind, a deer full in sight, the deer upon that woody shore, the deer like a sob caught in the throat. A deer, the wild deer, bedding down both utterly deer-like and unlike any deer, a deer and not a deer. Written deer, a book of deer, a written deer running through a written forest. The hornless deer, the merry deer, the mountain deer, the bustling deer, the light-headed deer, the highland deer, the fenced deer, the supple deer. The arrow found its mark, the deer left eye twitching, the deer, little deer too delicate for daylight. A deer dead on the edge of the Wilson River Road. Sleeping deer lying down next to the sleeping guns. Wild deer as it drank unsuspecting. Wounded deer, slaughtered deer, grey deer, Odway deer. Glass deer, darling deer, grief deer, skittish deer. The grass leaning where deer have looked, these deer balanced on delicate logic, till suddenly these few deer thoughts fall on one knee. Deer in the net, deer abandoned, deer scattered about a stricken deer that left the herd. Deer in summer, deer on the side of an American highway, deer grazing, deer in darkness, deer grunting, unwary deer struck by an arrow, deer ripened in death and a tuft of fur. The deer lay down their bones, no deer at all but two swans. There's not a deer. Farewell to the deer forests. Oh, the sweet swift deer, the fleet flown deer, the red rare deer, the lean lithe deer, deer gone, the wind. The deer dying was turning into a saint, the deer swinging the intricate velvet from its antlers. A golden deer with precious stones naturally bristling, a deer in the road, the light smudge of it. The girls lead deer to pastel bathrooms in a featherskin deer onesie. The girls hunt deer with patience and a pocket full of sugar cubes, silver swimsuit under bathrobe. Strokes a toy stuffed deer. The body of the deer jiggles in the bellies of all. No longer deer, she's barely a silver rocking. The deer demand worship in the softest terms. Deer heart is wild muscle, hum. The mask of a deer looking back, blue deer magic. Deers on the main road display solutions beyond. To think that deer survived with the heart of a deer. The deer know everything. They know this. Deer trail traditional, lies now wild, point to windward, and a deer came. Deer suddenly, there too on the hillside, 2 deer, 3 deer on the nearby hill, the deer in the dale, deer emerging the way a deer emerges from a thicket, always a deer breaking from a thicket. The deer came spinning, the deer came by the dozens, deer at edge of. Enter deer from woods on right. The fallow deer at the lonely house, the red deer on their tracks, edges waver and reknit roe deer. The hundreds of deer-headed deer who haunt our forests, jewelled deer nibbling at tender shoots, deer running between lime trunks, in another place deer speed over the open field. Deer step out in isolated air, deer break from the shadows, deer on the high peaks, the wandering senses, deer are in the dark, together near. No other deer provided the seemingly secret grooming, the soft spots in deer legs wrapping the long-stemmed deer. The deer who graze outside, the deer on the other side of the screen, the deer you never know. On the shore, whole herds of deer, simply there the deer, tough and blessed the deer, lived through an eternal age. Deer who portrayed the relatives of strangers, deer who crossed through knots of a curse, deer who entered our dream in white dawn, deer after deer crossing on the spines of fish, the shapes of deer and the curve of the earth.
Thank you. So as you can see from that, from the film, I'm really interested in both the ways that we think about deer. They can be seen as cute, they can be seen as very killable, they can be very prized, or they can be a problem. And there are lots of kind of paradoxes and contradictions that have made researching deer and human attitudes towards them really interesting. But I'm also very interested in ways of interacting with poetry. So there we have the ribbons, and one of the things I was really pleased to see was that at the exhibition in Rhodes, people kind of took the ribbons and looked at them. And so, yeah, I'm keen to make different ways that people can interact with poetry and to engage with different audiences so people can find different things in the poems. So with that in mind, I have actually made a set of Dear Poetry Tarot. So this is a work in progress. It's called The Tarot as Dear. And so far I've made, for those of you who know about the tarot, I've made the Major Arcana, which is the cards from 0 to 21, which is the reason for asking you about the numbers. And Del is actually going to help me in a moment, because what I'd like to do is read a selection based upon the numbers that you, the audience tonight, have chosen. But first, I wanted to say a little bit about the poems themselves, just to kind of give context. So the series was actually the founding series of my PhD research. I was traveling to and from London a lot, and I kept finding myself drawn to looking at deer in the fields. And I started kind of imagining and building up this idea of a kind of a deer avatar, or finding my inner deer. And this seems to kind of counteract, in a way, it's sort of almost an opposite relationship to what we see with things like Disney's Bambi, where you're kind of putting human features onto a deer, anthropomorphizing. I was kind of wanting to look the other way to see, can we find a deerness in ourselves? And so I have two characters. One is called Doe, who may or may not have deer characteristics, and one is called the passenger, who may or may not be human, and they may or may not kind of interchange at various points. So there's a deliberate kind of level of ambiguity here. And I'm going to try and complete a full tarot set at some point, but for the moment, we'll just make do with these. So who has a number they would like me to read? Oh, Brian is saying number 7. Okay, number 7 is the Chariot. Okay. So the Chariot, passenger POV. My river is the yellow line edging the platform. My trees are signal posts, pylons. My path is the rails cutting through. Okay. Should we do about 4 poems? Does that sound good, Del?
That sounds good. And you've got some in the chat. So in fact,
oh, I have, yeah. Ooh, okay, maybe. All right, let me see. So next was Drew, number 17. The Star. Doe stepped out of the ocean, out of the ground, out of the sky. And let's see, number 12 from Hannah. Find that. Oh, number 12 is the Hanged Man, but anyone who knows about the tarot knows that the Hanged Man is not necessarily a bad card. So just to reassure you, number 12. When Doe was a kid, they used to enjoy hanging upside down, on the swings. The passenger gripped onto the blood-scented chain. Okay. Should I do a couple more? So Danny, yours was 17 as well. Let's do number 16 then. Find that. Number 16, the Tower. The passenger observed as their carriage spiraled and shattered. Doe tiptoed among the broken. Okay. Should we have one last one? Right, number 3 from Rosa. The Empress. A cloven moon, a hoof, touched together at the point of incidence. Thank you very much, everyone.